I bought the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition the day it launched. If you did too, you already know how this story goes. $40 for an update Bethesda had been promising for years, packaged with bonus content that, on day one, didn't work. The first patch was supposed to fix it. The second patch was supposed to actually fix it. The third patch, and I'm not exaggerating, was supposed to fix what the second patch broke. 3 months later, parts of it are still broken for PlayStation players. They paid for DLC they can't access. And that's not even the worst thing Bethesda has done just this year. When I started writing this script, I had a list. 30-something things Bethesda has done wrong in the last 18 months. Broken patches, removed DLC, paid updates that shipped unfinished, a Switch port announced while existing players still couldn't load their saves, a Todd Howard interview that somehow made the situation worse the longer you sat with it. I was going to walk through all of them, a kind of greatest hits compilation of corporate disregard. About halfway through, I realized I was making the wrong video. That list of blunders isn't the real story. The story is that none of these are accidents anymore. They're a pattern. And the pattern says something Bethesda has spent 15 years pretending isn't true. They don't understand their players anymore. I'll be honest, I've been giving them passes for years. I gave Fallout 76 a pass. I gave Starfield a pass. I gave the Canvas bag a pass, and I gave the Empty Planets a pass, and I told myself every time that the next one would course correct. You probably did the same, up until a point. Maybe your point was different from mine. But everyone, or I should say most of the OG fans, had a point where they really become disillusioned and decide they're not giving them passes anymore. For me, the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition is where I ran out of passes. Watching them charge $40 for something that broke within hours, then take 3 months to half fix it, then announce they were bringing the same broken game to Switch. That's when it stopped reading as a bad period and started reading as a company that's forgotten who it's making games for. That's a big claim, I'm aware. The cracks didn't suddenly appear with the anniversary update, they've been there for a long time. Skyrim shipped broken too, quests breaking, NPCs falling through floors, that backwards dragon everyone still memes about. We forgave it, because the rest of the game was so good it didn't matter. Fallout 4 was when some of us started to notice serious changes in direction. The dialogue wheel, the voiced protagonist, the way the RPG mechanics got stripped back and oversimplified. It wasn't really a good RPG, but it was a good game. The world felt alive. There were so many places to explore, so many weapons to mod, so many adventures to go on. The settlement mechanic was introduced. Fallout 4 wasn't a great RPG, but it was a really fun game, so we gave it a pass and moved on. The problem is, Bethesda was paying attention. They noticed we'd accept a stripped-down RPG if the game was fun enough. They noticed we'd forgive broken launches, and in 2018, they tested how far they could push that. Now, I'm not sure whether they did it maliciously and calculatingly, but it doesn't matter. 2018 gave them precious insights into their audience. To understand how Bethesda ended up here, we have to go back to where the cracks first became impossible to ignore, specifically to Fallout 76. And a canvas bag. In November 2018, Bethesda released Fallout 76. It was the first time they'd made a multiplayer game. It was the first time they'd shipped a Fallout title without their lead writers, and it was the first time most of us realized something was actually wrong. You probably remember the canvas bag. The Power Armor Edition came with what was advertised as a high-quality canvas bag, a real piece of collectible merchandise. When the boxes arrived, the bags were made of cheap nylon. Bethesda's first response was that canvas was prohibitively expensive. Their second response, after the outrage, was to offer $5 worth of in-game currency as compensation. $5 for a $200 collector's edition. Then came the data leak. Customer support tickets that exposed names, addresses, and credit card information of players trying to get help. Then came the Atomic Shop, which sold cosmetic items at prices that started reasonable and got more expensive every quarter. Then came Fallout First, a monthly subscription that promised private servers, then shipped without delivering them properly. I gave it a pass. Many of us did. We told ourselves Fallout 76 was an experiment, a multiplayer game they'd never made before. Of course there were problems, of course the monetization was aggressive, they'd figure it out. The next one would be better. What I didn't realize at the time What I think a lot of us missed is that 76 wasn't a stumble. It was a survey. Again, whether calculated or not, Bethesda was finding out in real time how much we tolerate. They learned quite a lot. 5 years later, in September 2023, Bethesda released Starfield, their first new IP in 25 years, the most anticipated single-player game of the year. Now, about Starfield. I want to be frank about my relationship with this game from the start, because it's relevant to the rest of what I'm about to say. I was never hyped for Starfield. I'm not a sci-fi guy. I never have been. Fantasy and post-apocalyptic settings, Tamriel, the Wasteland, places where the world ended or is about to, that's what pulls me in. Hand me a spaceship and 1,000 planets, and I'm already drifting. It's absolutely a personal preference, not a critique. Plenty of people love science fiction, but it meant I went into Starfield without the emotional investment and hype that a lot of the Bethesda fanbase had at the time. And when the game came out, I wasn't crushed the way Starfield fans were, because I'd never given Bethesda my heart for this one. But almost everything that's wrong with Starfield has nothing to do with the fact that it's in space. Strip the spaceships out and put the same game in a fantasy world, and the problems would still be there. Starfield was bad because the formula didn't translate, and most of the people defending it were defending it on grounds that had nothing to do with the actual game. The thing about Starfield that took the longest for fans to admit is that Bethesda's formula didn't actually translate to this kind of world. Skyrim worked because you could walk in any direction and find something handcrafted. A barrow, a shrine, a giant camp, a strange NPC. Fallout 4 worked because the world had things for you to do, stories to get involved in at every corner. Skyrim's and Fallout 4's worlds were big, yes, but more importantly, they were dense. They were filled with stuff. Stuff to do, locations to explore, NPCs to talk to, locks to pick, books to read, stories to get immersed in. And Starfield, well, Starfield gave you 1,000 planets. Almost all of them were empty. And the ones that weren't empty were filled with the same 6 procedurally generated outposts you'd already seen 6 hours ago. The loading screens. The loading screens between cities, between space and planet, between ship and station, between conversations and combat. You couldn't actually fly your ship. The game that was sold as wide open space turned out to be a series of small rooms connected by menus. And the writing, the main story ended exactly when it got interesting. New Game Plus was offered as a substitute for an actual ending, a way to keep playing instead of a reason to have played. The temples, the supposed cosmic mystery at the heart of the game, were a grind. Float through floating rings, get a power, move on. Here's what I think Bethesda missed. They thought their formula was vast world plus dialogue choices plus skill trees. It wasn't, it was handcrafted moments. The reason people remember Skyrim isn't that it was big, lots of games are big. It's that everywhere you went, somebody had hand-placed a story. Starfield had 1,000 planets and almost no stories. That's a fundamental design problem. Even so, I gave Starfield a pass. I certainly wasn't a Starfield apologist. I never enjoyed the game, but I thought to myself, this was Bethesda trying something new. And trying something new is hard. They'd come back to what they're good at. Shattered space would fix the empty planets problem. The next update would add the content the launch should have had. The next game, the one that actually mattered, would be Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield didn't have to be great, it just had to be a learning experience. That, in retrospect, was exactly the kind of generous interpretation Bethesda was counting on. By the end of 2024, 2 patterns were clear. Fallout 76 had become a successful live service game. Not because it was great, but because Bethesda had successfully trained an audience to pay for it, and Starfield had quietly become Bethesda's least loved single-player game, with a player count that fell off a cliff and never recovered. You'd think this would be a wake-up call. You'd think Bethesda would look at what wasn't working and adjust. Instead, they did something I genuinely didn't see coming. They went back to Fallout 4, the game everyone agreed was their best in a decade, and they broke it. In November 2025, Bethesda released the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition update. It was $40. It was the next-gen update they'd been promising for years. It bundled new Creation Club content, performance improvements, and a handful of cosmetic items into what was marketed as the definitive way to play Fallout 4 in 2025. I bought it, I'm sure some of you remember the rest because we covered every step of it on this channel as it happened. The update broke immediately. On PC, mods stopped working en masse, script extenders had to be rewritten, mod loaders crashed, 10-year-old setups stopped loading. On consoles, performance got worse instead of better in some areas, and on PlayStation specifically, players started losing access to DLC they had legally purchased years ago. Not couldn't play it temporarily, actually missing from their libraries. The first patch was 1.41, a list of fixes longer than most patch notes I'd seen from Bethesda in years. I went through it line by line on this channel. The patch fixed several launch bugs. It also introduced new ones, including ones that broke things the original release hadn't broken. The console community noticed within 48 hours. Then came the December update, then another patch in January, then patches for the patches, and every time the same pattern. Announce a fix, ship the fix, hear from players that the fix broke something else, repeat. In the middle of all this, the PlayStation DLC situation got worse. Players who had paid for downloadable content years ago, sometimes a decade ago, couldn't access it. Common workarounds were failing. Bethesda's response was slow and confused. Some players got their DLC back after the February patch, others didn't. A small but vocal group still doesn't have access to content they paid for. It is, as far as I can tell, the first time a major publisher has effectively retroactively deleted content from people's libraries through neglect. There's another casualty from the anniversary mess that didn't get as much coverage as the PlayStation situation, but probably hurt Bethesda more in the long run. The modding community, the people who have actually kept Fallout 4 alive for 10 years, got obliterated overnight. I want to be clear about what this means, because I think people who don't mod tend to underestimate this. Modders aren't just enthusiast players. They're the entire reason Fallout 4 is still on most people's hard drives in 2025. The unofficial patches that fix bugs, Bethesda never bothered to. The gameplay overhauls that turn a mediocre RPG into something close to great. The new quest lines, the new weapons, the visual upgrades, the survival systems. There are players who've never played the vanilla version of Fallout 4. They bought the game, installed a curated mod list, and played that instead. The anniversary update broke almost all of it. Script extenders had to be rewritten from scratch. Mod loaders stopped working. Setups that had taken people years to assemble became unplayable. And because the update was forced, you couldn't opt out, you couldn't roll back. Players who didn't want it got it anyway. 10-year-old playthroughs broke on launch day. The community response was sharper than I think Bethesda expected. Major modders pushed back publicly. Long-running projects went silent or were quietly shelved. The conversation shifted from how do we work around this to why are we still doing this for free? These are people who have given Bethesda's games tens of thousands of unpaid hours of labor. People who have made Bethesda's titles more valuable to play, and a lot of them don't trust the studio anymore. That's not a player problem, that's a relationship problem. And it matters specifically because modding is the reason Bethesda games have always had the lifespan they have. Skyrim is 15 years old this year, and people are still playing it, and a big part of the reason why is because modders keep finding new ways to make it interesting. The same was true of Fallout 4. The same will likely need to be true of Elder Scrolls 6 for it to be the kind of game it needs to be. And right now, Bethesda is teaching the people who would make that happen that they're not worth being careful with. I went back through every Fallout 4 video I've made in the last year while writing the script, and I saw that every fix announcement was followed by another problem within 2 weeks. The pattern is the story. Then Todd Howard did an interview. I won't recap the whole thing. I did a separate video on it. But the takeaway, if you sat with it long enough, was that Bethesda's leadership doesn't seem to know there's a problem. Howard talked about Fallout 4 as if it were a beloved classic the studio was lovingly tending. He talked about Creation Club as if it were a feature players had been asking for. He talked about the Switch port, yes, the Switch port, as if it were a reward for fans, not the release of a game that didn't work on the platforms it was already on. That's the Switch port, by the way. While Fallout 4 is still actively broken on PlayStation, while Anniversary Edition is still actively dropping save files on PC, Bethesda announced they were bringing the same broken version to a Nintendo console. The phrasing was, roughly, that this was more ways to experience Fallout 4. I keep coming back to that phrase. More ways to experience Fallout 4. It's the kind of corporate sentence that sounds normal until you remember the existing ways aren't working. Here's what I think the last 18 months actually prove. It isn't that Bethesda has gotten worse at making games, though that's absolutely true. It's that they've stopped treating their existing audience as worth protecting. The anniversary update wasn't broken because they tried something ambitious and missed. It was broken because they didn't test it. The PlayStation DLC wasn't lost because of a difficult technical problem. It was lost because nobody at Bethesda was watching closely enough to catch it. The Switch port wasn't announced because they were ready. It was announced because they had a marketing window to fill. None of these are accidents. They're a pattern, and the pattern says Bethesda has stopped seeing the player as a partner and started seeing them as a customer. They've already converted. I made a video earlier this year called FromSoftware is the Bethesda we lost. A lot of you watched it. I want to come back to that idea here because I think the comparison is sharper now than it was when I first made it. Same era, 2 legacy single-player RPG studios. 3 years of major releases between them. In 2022, FromSoftware shipped Elden Ring. The next year, Bethesda shipped Starfield. One studio went into an open world they'd never made before, bigger than anything they'd ever built, and made every square mile feel hand-placed. The other studio went into space, a setting that should have been their easiest to fake at scale because nobody expects every planet to be interesting, and somehow made it feel emptier than the actual void. The next year, FromSoftware shipped Shadow of the Erdtree, a $40 expansion that the studio took 2 years to make. It was difficult, opinionated, and uncompromising. It assumed its audience had finished the base game. It didn't add quest markers. It didn't ease the difficulty. It charged a fair price for an enormous amount of new content, and it didn't apologize for any of it. Bethesda shipped the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition. Also $40, also marketed as a major update. The difference is that FromSoftware respected its players enough to challenge them, and Bethesda respected its players enough to ship them a broken product and hope they wouldn't notice. I don't think this contrast is unfair. I think it's the whole problem. FromSoftware operates on the assumption that their audience is the smartest, most demanding audience in gaming. Their entire design philosophy treats the player as a partner in the experience. Bethesda used to operate this way too. Morrowind didn't hold your hand. Oblivion let you fail. Fallout 3 trusted you to figure out the wasteland. Somewhere along the way, that stopped being true. The legacy studios that are surviving the 2020s are the ones that still take their audience seriously. The ones that aren't survive only as long as the goodwill lasts. Which brings me to Elder Scrolls 6. I want to believe it'll be different. I've been playing Bethesda games for over 20 years. The Elder Scrolls is the reason I care about RPGs in the first place. I want this game to come out and be the thing that resets the conversation. I want to make a video 3 years from now titled Bethesda Finally Got It Right. But I've watched the last 18 months and nothing I've seen suggests they've learned what they need to learn. The thing Bethesda needs to figure out isn't technical. It's not better engines, more polish, or larger teams. The thing they need to figure out is who they're making games for and what those people actually want. Right now, every signal coming out of the studio suggests they think the answer is everyone and as much money as possible. That's not an answer. That's how you make games like Starfield. I'm not predicting Elder Scrolls 6 will fail. I'm saying that if it succeeds, it'll be because of something Bethesda has to deliberately choose to do. Go back to the studio they were 10 years ago and trust the audience to meet them there. Right now, I don't see them choosing that. I hope I'm wrong. Here's where I land on all of this, and I'll try to be as measured as I can. Bethesda still makes worlds that very few can make. They just stopped trusting the people who live in them. And until they remember what made them worth defending in the first place, the willingness to do the hard work, ship the polished thing, respect the audience enough to challenge them, every new release is going to be another test of how much we'll tolerate before we finally walk away for good. For now, I'm not definitely walking away for good yet. I've been here too long, and I care too much, and Elder Scrolls 6 is going to get a fair viewing from me whenever it shows up. If for no other reason, then at least because so far, they haven't truly screwed up the Elder Scrolls series at least. But I'm done giving them passes. The $40 I spent on the anniversary edition was the last $40 I'm spending on a promise. The next thing they ship has to actually be the thing. And if you've watched this far, I think you might be there too. We've been the audience that forgives. We can also be the audience that pays attention. The next few years will decide which one Bethesda thinks we still are.